My family swore I was a Navy dropout. I stood silent at my brother's SEAL ceremony. Then his general locked eyes with me and said, "Colonel, you're here." The crowd froze. My father's jaw hit the floor. The auditorium at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado held 300 people that humid Friday afternoon in June. My brother Derek stood on stage in his crisp dress whites, trident pin gleaming on his chest, while our parents sat in the front row beaming with pride. Mom clutched a bouquet of roses she'd brought for the photo opportunity afterward. Dad had his phone ready, documenting every second of his son's Navy SEAL graduation. I sat 17 rows back, wearing civilian clothes, a simple navy blazer, and khaki pants. No one in my family had noticed me slip into the back of the ceremony. They hadn't expected me to come. Why would they? According to the story they'd told everyone for the past 10 years, I was the family disappointment, the daughter who'd washed out of basic training, too weak for military life. The commanding officer, Rear Admiral James Hendricks, stepped to the podium. He began the traditional speech about sacrifice, dedication, and the warrior spirit. I'd heard versions of this speech dozens of times throughout my career. I knew what was coming in the program, the recognition of distinguished guests, including senior officers in attendance. My phone vibrated in my pocket. A text from my handler. "Situation in Kabul escalating. Need you wheels up by 2200. I typed back a quick acknowledgement. This ceremony would be over by 1700. I'd have time. Admiral Hendricks continued, his voice carrying through the space. Before we proceed with the presentation of tridents, I'd like to recognize some distinguished guests here today. We have several senior officers in attendance. My mother was recording Derek on her phone. My father had tears in his eyes. This was his moment. His son, the one who'd made him proud. Derek had always been the golden child, the athlete, the popular one, the son who followed Dad into military service the right way. We're honored to have with us today, Admiral Hendricks said, scanning the audience, Colonel Sarah Thompson, Naval Intelligence, recipient of the Defense Distinguished Service Medal. The silence that followed was absolute. 300 heads turned, searching for the colonel in their midst. My father's phone dropped into his lap. My mother's hand flew to her mouth, roses falling to the floor. Derek's eyes went wide on stage, his carefully maintained military bearing cracking for just a moment. I stood up slowly from my seat in the 17th row. Every eye in that auditorium locked onto me. The woman they'd written off a decade ago, the daughter who'd supposedly failed, who couldn't hack it, who'd come home in disgrace. Admiral Hendricks, who'd known I'd be here, gave me a slight nod. "Colonel Thompson, would you please come forward?" The walk down that aisle felt like it took an hour, though it was probably only 30 seconds. I could feel my family's shock radiating from the front row. Other families whispered, confused, checking their programs. The name Thompson appeared twice, once for the graduating SEAL, once in the distinguished guest section, but they hadn't made the connection. I reached the front of the auditorium and rendered a crisp salute to the Admiral, who returned it with equal precision. "Colonel," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "thank you for taking time from your demanding schedule to join us. I understand you're leaving for deployment tonight." "Yes, sir," I replied, my voice steady and clear. "Wheels up at 2200. Then we're doubly honored by your presence." He turned to address the audience. For those who don't know, Colonel Thompson oversees critical intelligence operations throughout CENTCOM. Her work remains largely classified, but I can tell you that her service has directly saved American lives on multiple occasions. My father had gone completely white. My mother was crying, but these weren't tears of joy like the ones she'd shed moments ago for Derek. These were tears of shock, confusion, maybe even shame. Derek stood frozen on stage with the other graduates, his expression unreadable. We'd always been competitive as kids, but this was something else entirely. His big moment, the culmination of years of brutal training, and suddenly his washout sister was standing in the front of the room with eagles on her collar. Admiral Hendricks gestured for me to take a seat in the front row, the section reserved for VIPs and distinguished guests. There was an empty chair next to a Marine Corps general. I sat down, maintaining perfect military posture as the ceremony continued, but I could feel my parents' eyes boring into the back of my head. I could sense the questions exploding in their minds, the desperate need to understand how this was possible, how they'd gotten it so catastrophically wrong. The ceremony continued, but the energy had shifted. Derek and his fellow graduates received their tridents, each moment that should have been triumphant, now colored by the revelation still reverberating through the room. When it was Derek's turn to cross the stage, he shook Admiral Hendricks's hand and received his in, but his eyes kept darting to where I sat in the front row. After the formal ceremony concluded, families flooded toward the stage for photos and congratulations. I remained seated, checking my phone for updates on the Kabul situation. The Marine general next to me leaned over. "Your family?" he asked, nodding toward where my parents stood, rooted to their spots, staring at me. "Yes, sir." "They didn't know?" "No, sir." "Classified assignment. Need to know basis." He nodded slowly. "That's going to be one hell of a conversation." I stood up, smoothing my blazer. My mother had started moving toward me, Dad right behind her, both of them looking like they'd seen a ghost. Derek was surrounded by his SEAL buddies and their families, but he kept glancing over his shoulder at the scene unfolding near the front row. Mom reached me first. Her face was blotchy from crying, mascara smudged. "Sarah?" Her voice cracked on my name. "I don't understand. You told us you washed out. You said you failed basic training." "No," I corrected her gently but firmly. "You told everyone I failed." "I never said that. I couldn't say anything." Dad pushed forward, his face red. "What the hell is going on? Colonel? You're a colonel? That's impossible. You've been home for years, working at that bookstore." "The bookstore is a cover," I said simply. "It's actually a safe house. Has been for 8 years." The implications crashed over them like a wave. Every Sunday dinner where they'd made subtle digs about my lack lack of ambition. Every family gathering where they praised Derek's military career while barely acknowledging my presence. Every Christmas where they'd given Derek expensive gifts while I got gift cards and books, things for someone who'd never amounted to much. But you let us think, Mom started. I didn't let you think anything, I interrupted. You assumed. You decided what my story was without asking me, without trusting me. And honestly, it made my cover more believable. Admiral Hendricks approached our small circle. Colonel, I hate to interrupt, but your car is here. You need to get to the airfield. I nodded. Yes, sir. I turned back to my parents. I have to go. I have a plane to catch. Wait, Dad said desperately. You can't just, we need to talk about this. We need to understand. I've been trying to tell you who I really am for 10 years, I said quietly. You never wanted to listen. You were too busy being disappointed in me to see what was right in front of you. Derek had broken away from his group and was walking toward us, still in his dress whites, his new trident catching the light. When he reached us, he looked at me, really looked at me, maybe for the first time in a decade. Sarah, he said, I don't know what to say. Congratulations on your trident, I replied. You earned it. Bud S. is no joke. He nodded slowly, then did something that surprised me. He came to attention and saluted me. A junior enlisted man saluting a senior officer. It was the proper military protocol. But it was more than that. It was acknowledgement, respect, maybe even an apology. I returned his salute crisply. Your car, ma'am, a young ensign said, appearing at my elbow. The driver says you're cutting it close. I picked up my small bag from under my chair. I'd traveled light, knowing I wouldn't be staying long. As I turned to leave, my mother grabbed my arm. Please, she whispered, don't go like this. When will you be back? I don't know, Mom. Could be weeks, could be months. The nature of my work is unpredictable. Your work, Dad repeated, as if testing the words. Naval intelligence, Defense Distinguished Service Medal. How did we not know any of this? Because you never asked, I said simply. You decided who I was, what I'd accomplished, and what I was worth. And nothing I said could change your minds, so eventually, I stopped trying. I walked out of that auditorium with 300 pairs of eyes watching me go. Behind me, I could hear my mother sobbing and my father demanding answers from anyone who would listen. Derek stood silent, still at attention, watching his sister, the colonel, the intelligence officer, the person he'd dismissed as a failure, walk away to catch a plane to a war zone. The late afternoon sun hit me as I exited the building. A black SUV waited at the curb, engine running. As I climbed into the back seat, I took one last look at the building where my brother had achieved his dream, where my family's entire understanding of reality had just been demolished. My phone buzzed again. Another update from Kabul. The situation was deteriorating faster than expected. I needed to focus on the mission ahead, not the wreckage I'd just left behind. But as the SUV pulled away from Naval Amphibious Base Coronado, I couldn't help but wonder what would happen next. Would my family try to rebuild what they'd destroyed? Would they finally see me for who I really was? Or would they find a way to make this about them? About how I'd deceived them? How I'd let them believe a lie? The questions would have to wait. I had a war to fight and Americans to protect. That's what I did. That's who I was, whether my family understood it or not. The C-17 transport lifted off from Naval Air Station North Island at exactly 2200 hours. I sat strapped into the uncomfortable mesh seating, laptop open on my knees, reviewing intelligence briefs about the deteriorating situation in Kabul. Around me, a team of special operations personnel prepared their gear, their faces reflecting the same focused intensity I felt. My phone had blown up during the drive to the airfield. 17 missed calls from Mom, 12 from Dad, 8 text messages from Derek, and even a voicemail from my Aunt Linda, who I hadn't spoken to in 3 years. I'd turned it off before boarding. Whatever family crisis was unfolding back in California would have to wait. People's lives depended on the mission ahead, but my mind kept drifting back to that moment in the auditorium, the look on my father's face when Admiral Hendricks called me Colonel, the sound of my mother's roses hitting the floor, Derek's stunned expression as his perfect SEAL graduation became about me instead. Ma'am, Sergeant First Class Rodriguez sat down next to me. You good? Fine, Rodriguez. Just reviewing the brief. He glanced at my laptop screen. That's the same paragraph you've been reading for 5 minutes. I smiled slightly. Rodriguez had been on my team for 3 years. He knew me too well. Family stuff, it'll keep. The ceremony today? He'd known I was attending my brother's graduation. How'd that go? Complicated. He nodded, understanding that I didn't want to talk about it. That was one of the things I appreciated about military culture. People respected boundaries. Unlike my family, who'd spent a decade pushing their narrative onto me without ever asking for mine. The flight to Kabul would take 19 hours with refueling stops. I had time to decompress, to prepare mentally for what waited in Afghanistan. The intelligence suggested an imminent attack on the embassy compound. My team's job was to identify the threat vectors and neutralize them before American personnel were endangered. But even as I reviewed satellite imagery and signal intercepts, part of my brain kept replaying the past decade. The lies I'd had to maintain, the cover story I'd had to live, the quiet acceptance of my family's disappointment because it served a greater purpose. It had started 10 years ago, right after I'd completed basic training at Naval Station Great Lakes. I'd finished top of my class, caught the attention of naval intelligence recruiters, and been offered a position in a specialized program so classified that even my existence in it had to be scrubbed from official records. The program required deep cover operatives, intelligence officers who could blend into civilian life while running networks of assets and coordinating covert operations. It meant giving up the visible markers of military success, the uniforms, the ceremonies, the public recognition. It meant letting people, even family, believe whatever they wanted about you. When I'd come home after my training, I'd tried to explain that I couldn't talk about my assignment, that there were were classification issues, that I was still serving. But my father had seen a daughter who wasn't wearing a uniform, who didn't have deployment orders he could show his friends, who worked in a bookstore instead of on a ship or a base. "You quit," he'd said one night over dinner, 6 months after I'd returned. "Just admit it, Sarah. The military wasn't for you, and that's okay. Not everyone can hack it." I'd opened my mouth to argue, then closed it. My handler's words echoed in my mind. "The best cover is the one people create for themselves. Let them tell your story. Correct nothing." So I'd let him believe it. I'd let them all believe it. And over the years, their version of events had calcified into accepted family truth. Sarah, the daughter who'd washed out, who couldn't cut it, who came home in disgrace and settled for managing a bookstore in a strip mall. The bookstore was actually a sophisticated intelligence operation. The customers were often assets checking in, leaving dead drops, or receiving instructions. The apartment above the store contained secure communications equipment and served as a safe house for operatives transitioning through the region. My employees were all intelligence analysts, but my family saw a failure, someone who'd aimed high and fallen short, someone to pity and compare unfavorably to Derek, who'd done everything right. Derek had announced his intention to become a Navy SEAL when he was 16. Dad had been ecstatic, his son following in his footsteps. Dad had served in the Navy too, though he'd never made it past Petty Officer Second Class, joining the elite special operations community that Dad had always revered. From that moment on, every family gathering became about Derek's journey, his high school wrestling championships, his appointment to the Naval Academy, his commission as an officer, his acceptance into BUD/S training. Mom kept a scrapbook of his achievements, a thick album she brought out at every opportunity. My own accomplishments, the ones I could never talk about, went unrecorded. The terrorist cell I'd helped dismantle in Yemen, the human trafficking network we'd destroyed in Southeast Asia, the intelligence that prevented an attack on a NATO base in Germany. All classified, all invisible, all impossible to share with the people who thought I spent my days alphabetizing romance novels. The plane hit turbulence, jolting me back to the present. Rodriguez was asleep now, head back against the bulkhead. Around me, the other team members were in various states of rest or preparation. We had a long flight ahead and a dangerous mission waiting at the end of it. I pulled up the family photos on my phone before I'd turned it off. There was one from last Christmas, all of us around my parents' dining room table. Derek in the center, Mom and Dad flanking him, their faces bright with pride. I was at the edge of the frame, barely in the shot, wearing the cardigan Mom had given me from a discount store, while Derek modeled the Tag Heuer watch Dad had bought him. In the photo, I was smiling, playing my role perfectly. The underachieving daughter, grateful to be included, invisible in her own family. No one looking at that picture would guess that I'd spent Christmas Eve coordinating a hostage rescue operation in Syria, that I'd left Christmas dinner early because I had to debrief a source who'd infiltrated a terrorist organization. My phone suddenly powered back on. Must have been bumped in my bag during the turbulence. Immediately, messages started flooding in. I almost turned it off again. But one message preview caught my eye. "Derek, I need to talk to you, please, before you deploy wherever you're going." I stared at the message for a long moment, then opened the full conversation. "Derek, Sarah, I don't know what to say about today. I'm still processing what happened. Derek, Dad is losing his mind. He's been calling everyone he knows in the Navy trying to verify your rank. Derek, Mom hasn't stopped crying. She keeps saying she doesn't understand how this happened. Derek, I need you to know that I had no idea. None of us did. How is that possible? Derek, also, I'm sorry. I know that's not enough, but I'm sorry for everything, for how we treated you, for what we assumed. Derek, please call when you can. I know you're probably halfway to somewhere dangerous, but when you can, call me." I read through the messages twice, looking for the catch, the angle, the way this would somehow become about him again, but they seemed genuine. Derek had always been competitive, sometimes arrogant, often thoughtless, but he'd never been deliberately cruel. He'd just been blind, like the rest of them. I typed out a response. "In the air. Mission critical. Will reach out when I can. Congrats again on the Trident. You earned it." I hesitated, then added, "And Derek, I never quit. I never failed. I've been serving this entire time. You just couldn't see it." I hit send, then powered the phone back down before the rest of the messages could load. Whatever chaos was unfolding back home would have to unfold without me. I had work to do. The remainder of the flight passed in a blur of briefings, equipment checks, and fitful sleep. We landed at Bagram Airfield just after dawn local time, the Afghan mountains sharp against the brightening sky. A Black Hawk helicopter waited to take us to Kabul. As we lifted off from Bagram, I looked down at the scarred landscape below, the evidence of decades of conflict visible in every direction. This was my world now, the place where my choices mattered, where my skills saved lives, where I knew exactly who I was and what I was worth. My family might finally be learning the truth about me, but I'd learned the truth about them years ago. They loved the idea of military service when it came with visible markers of success, uniforms and medals and ceremonies they could post on social media, but they had no respect for the invisible work, the classified missions, the sacrifices made in silence. The Black Hawk touched down at the embassy compound 40 minutes later. The situation was worse than the briefings had indicated. Intelligence suggested the attack would come within 72 hours. We had 3 days to identify the threat and stop it. Ambassador Patricia Morrison met me in the secure communications room, her face drawn with stress. "Colonel Thompson, thank God you're here. We've got chatter suggesting multiple attack vectors, but we can't pin down the primary threat. I pulled up the latest intelligence on the secure terminal. Walk me through what you've got." For the next 6 hours, I worked with my team to analyze signals intelligence, human intelligence reports, and satellite imagery. We built a picture of the threat network, identified key players, and developed a plan to neutralize them before they could act. It was exactly the kind of work I'd been doing for 10 years, the kind of work my family had no idea existed, the kind of work that would never appear in any scrapbook or social media post. At hour 8, Rodriguez brought me coffee. "Ma'am, you need to take a break. You've been at this since we landed. I'll break when we've got this locked down. That could be days, then I'll break in days." He knew better than to argue. We returned to the analysis, cross-referencing communications intercepts with movement patterns. By hour 12, we'd identified the attack team's safe house and the likely timing of their operation. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I'd turned it back on to coordinate with other intelligence assets, and now I regretted it. 3 more calls from Mom, 5 from Dad, 2 from Aunt Linda, and 1 text from Derek that made me pause. Derek. "Dad tracked down Admiral Hendricks, confirmed everything. Now he won't shut up about how proud he is of you. Mom is planning a party. They want to make up for everything. I told them it doesn't work like that, but they're not listening. Just wanted to warn you." I read the message twice, feeling a complicated mix of emotions. Pride? Now? After 10 years of disappointment and dismissal? A party? To celebrate what exactly? The daughter they'd written off or the colonel they'd just discovered? Rodriguez glanced at my screen. "Family still blowing you up?" "They just found out who I really am," I said. "Now they want to throw me a party." He snorted. "Let me guess. They thought you were something else before? They thought I was a failure who couldn't hack basic training." His eyebrows shot up. "Seriously?" "Seriously. I've been running covert operations for 10 years, and they thought I managed a bookstore because I washed out of the military. That's cold. That's what happens when you let people tell your story for you." We worked through the night, coordinating with special operations forces on the ground to set up surveillance on the safe house we'd identified. By the time the sun rose over Kabul on my second day in country, we had eyes on the attack team and a plan to roll them up before they could execute their operation. The raid went down at 0400 on day 3. My team coordinated from the operations center while Navy SEALs, maybe some of Derek's new teammates for all I knew, hit the safe house hard and fast. They captured 7 fighters and enough explosive material to level half the embassy compound. Ambassador Morrison hugged me when the all-clear came through. "Colonel, you and your team just saved dozens of American lives. Just doing our job, ma'am." But as the adrenaline faded and the mission wound down, I found myself thinking about my family again, about the party they wanted to throw, the pride they suddenly felt, the daughter they'd decided I was now that they knew the truth. Part of me wanted to refuse, to tell them it was too little, too late, that they'd lost the right to celebrate me when they'd spent 10 years dismissing me. But another part of me, the part that had sat through countless family dinners feeling invisible, wanted their recognition, wanted them to see me, finally, truly see me. My phone rang. It was a video call from Derek. I hesitated, then answered. His face appeared on screen, and behind him I could see he was at our parents' house. "Sarah, hey, do you have a minute?" "A minute. We just wrapped a critical operation." "Of course. Look, can I put Mom and Dad on? They really need to talk to you." Before I could respond, my mother's face appeared on screen, tears already streaming down her cheeks. "Sarah, baby, please come home. Please let us explain. We need to make this right." And there it was, the moment of decision. Did I let them back in? Did I accept their sudden change of heart? Or did I protect myself from the people who'd hurt me most? The answer wasn't as simple as I wanted it to be. "Mom," I said carefully, watching her tear-streaked face on the screen, "I'm in the middle of a combat zone. This isn't the time." "Then when?" Her voice cracked. "When is the time, Sarah? You're always deployed, always busy, always somewhere we can't reach you. That's my job. That's what being a naval intelligence officer means." My father pushed into frame, his face red and blotchy. "We had no idea, Sarah. How were we supposed to know? You never told us." The words hung in the air between us, separated by 7,000 miles and 10 years of assumptions. "I tried to tell you," I said quietly. "The first year, I tried. But you'd already decided what my story was. After a while, it was easier to let you believe what you wanted." Derek appeared behind them, his expression troubled. "Sarah, that's not fair. You actively hid this from us." "I was under orders, Derek. Deep cover operatives don't advertise their status. The whole point is to be invisible. Even to your own family?" Mom sobbed. "Especially to my own family," I replied, "because family talks, family shares, family posts on social media. And in my line of work, that gets people killed." The silence that followed was heavy. Around me in the operations center, my team was packing up equipment, preparing for our next movement. Rodriguez caught my eye and pointed at his watch. "We needed to move out in 20 minutes. "I have to go," I said. "We're relocating to another site." "When will you be back?" Dad demanded. "When can we see you?" "I don't know. Could be weeks. Could be months." "This is ridiculous," he said, his voice rising. "You're our daughter. We have a right to know what's going on in your life." Something inside me snapped. 10 years of biting my tongue, of playing the role, of accepting their dismissal, all of it came boiling to the surface. "A right?" I said, my voice sharp. "You have a right? You spent a decade telling everyone I was a failure. You compared me to Derek at every opportunity. You gave him expensive gifts while I got clearance rack cardigans. You filled photo albums with his achievements while my existence was an afterthought. You didn't want to know what was going on in my life, Dad. You wanted me to fit into the narrative you'd created. And when I didn't, you wrote me off." My mother gasped. Derek's face went pale. My father opened his mouth, then closed it. "I have to go," I repeated. "I have Americans to protect. You know, the job you thought I wasn't good enough to do." I ended the call before any of them could respond. My hands were shaking. Rodriguez appeared at my elbow with a bottle of water. "That sounded rough, ma'am." "Family often is," I said, taking a long drink. "Status on the transport?" "Ready when you are. We're moving to Bagram for 48 hours, then back to the States. Back to the States. Back to San Diego. Back to my bookstore cover and my invisible life. Except now the invisibility was shattered. My family knew, and somehow Wow, that felt more dangerous than any combat zone. The next 2 days at Bagram were consumed with debriefs, after-action reports, and coordination with other intelligence units. I deliberately kept my phone off, unwilling to deal with the emotional fallout while I was still in mission mode, but I couldn't stop thinking about that video call, about the hurt and confusion on my family's faces. Part of me felt guilty. They were my family, after all. They loved me, in their own complicated way. But love without respect, love without trust, love that only appeared when achievement was visible and quantifiable. That wasn't the kind of love I needed or wanted. On the flight back to the States, I finally turned on my phone. The messages were overwhelming. 53 texts, 32 voicemails, multiple emails. Most were from family, but there were also messages from people I hadn't heard from in years. High school friends, distant cousins, neighbors from my childhood. Word had spread. My father had apparently told everyone he knew about my real rank and position. The daughter he'd dismissed as a failure was now someone to brag about. It was exactly what I'd expected, and exactly what made me furious. One message stood out, though. It was from my grandmother, my father's mother, who I'd always been close to growing up. Sarah, darling, I always knew you were doing something important. You have your grandfather's eyes, the same look he had when he came back from Korea and couldn't talk about where he'd been or what he'd done. I'm proud of you. I've always been proud of you. Come see me when you're home. Love, Grandma Rose. I read it 3 times, feeling tears prick my eyes for the first time since the ceremony. Someone had seen me. Someone had known, even without confirmation, even without proof. Someone had trusted me. We landed at Naval Air Station, North Island, 48 hours after leaving Kabul. I had 72 hours of mandatory downtime before my next assignment. Time the Navy insisted intelligence officers take after high-stress operations. Time I usually spent alone in my apartment, decompressing in silence. But as I collected my gear and headed to my car, I knew this downtime would be different. My family wasn't going to let this go. They'd want explanations, apologies, recognition. They'd want to rewrite history, to pretend the past 10 years of disappointment hadn't happened. My phone rang as I started the engine. Derek's number. I almost didn't answer, then decided to get it over with. What? Sarah, please, just listen for a minute. I waited, saying nothing. I've been thinking about everything, he said. About how we treated you, how I treated you. And you're right. We were terrible. We assumed the worst and never questioned it. Okay. That's it? Just okay? What do you want me to say, Derek? You're right. You were terrible. Do you want me to absolve you? Make you feel better about it? No, I want to understand. Why didn't you fight harder to make us believe you? I pulled out of the parking lot, heading toward the bookstore. Because fighting would have blown my cover. Because my mission was more important than your opinion of me. Because after a while, I realized that you didn't want to believe in me. You wanted to believe I'd failed. Because it made your success look even better. That's not true, he protested, but his voice lacked conviction. Isn't it? Think about every family dinner, every holiday, every gathering. You were always center stage, always the accomplished one, always the son mom and dad were proud of, and I was the cautionary tale, the one who'd aimed high and fallen short. It made your story better, Derek. The successful SEAL and his washout sister. The silence stretched between us. I never thought of it that way, he finally said. I know, that's part of the problem. So what now? You just cut us all off? Pretend we don't exist? I pulled into the strip mall parking lot, looking at the bookstore that had been my cover for 8 years. I don't know yet. I need time to think. Mom and dad want to throw you a party. They've invited like 100 people. A party, I repeated flatly. To celebrate what exactly? To celebrate you. Your achievements, your service. They want to celebrate the daughter they just discovered exists. They want to show everyone that they weren't wrong, that they always knew I'd amount to something. They want to rewrite history for their social media feeds. Sarah, that's harsh, is it? Watch. The party will be full of their friends, not mine. The speeches will be about how proud they've always been, how they always believed in me. There will be photos and posts about their amazing daughter, the Colonel, with no mention of the decade they spent treating me like a disappointment. Derek was quiet for a moment. You're probably right. I know I'm right, and I haven't decided yet if I'm going to play along. What would it take, he asked, for you to forgive us? I sat in my car, staring at the bookstore, thinking about the question. What would it take? An apology? Recognition of the harm they'd caused? Changed behavior going forward? All of the above? I don't know, I admitted, but it's more than a party and some belated pride. It's going to take them actually seeing me, the real me, not the version they want to show off to their friends. Fair enough. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. Really sorry. And I want to do better. Then do better, Derek. Start by telling mom and dad that I'm not interested in their party. They won't take that well. That's not my problem. I ended the call and sat in the silence of my car, looking at my reflection in the rearview mirror. I looked tired. The mission had taken its toll. The family drama even more so. I needed rest, solitude, time to process everything that had happened. But first, I needed to visit Grandma Rose. She lived in a retirement community 20 minutes from the bookstore, a pleasant complex with gardens and walking paths. I'd visited her regularly over the years, one of the few family members who never made me feel like a disappointment. She'd served as a Navy nurse during the Korean War, understood military life in ways my parents never had. I found her in the community garden, tending to her roses. She looked up as I approached, her weathered face breaking into a genuine smile. "There's my girl," she said, pulling off her gardening gloves. "Come here." She hugged me tightly, and for the first time in days, I felt myself relax. "Rough mission?" she asked, gesturing for me to sit on the nearby bench. "They're all rough, but yes, this one was particularly intense. And then you came home to family drama." I laughed bitterly. "You heard. Your father called me, all excited about his daughter, the Colonel. I told him he was 10 years too late with his pride." "What did he say?" "He sputtered and made excuses. I told him to save it for someone who might believe him." She patted my hand. "I'm proud of you, Sarah. Not because of your rank or your medals, but because you stayed true to yourself even when it cost you everything. It cost me my family. No, sweetheart, your family cost themselves you. There's a difference. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the birds and the distant sounds of other residents going about their day. They want to throw me a party, I finally said. Of course they do. They want to perform their pride, prove to everyone that they always believed in you. Exactly. Are you going to let them? I watched a butterfly land on one of her roses, its wings slowly opening and closing. I don't know. Part of me wants to refuse, to make them sit with their failure as parents, but another part of me wants the recognition, wants them to finally see me. That's the little girl inside you, Grandma Rose said gently, the one who spent her childhood trying to earn her parents' approval. But you're not that little girl anymore, Sarah. You're a colonel in naval intelligence. You've saved lives, prevented attacks, served your country with distinction. You don't need their approval. I know, but I still want it. That's human. But here's what you need to ask yourself. Will their belated recognition heal the wounds they caused? Or will it just be another performance? Another way for them to make your story about them? I knew the answer. I'd known it the moment Admiral Hendricks called my name at Derek's ceremony, the moment I saw my parents' shocked faces, the moment I realized their pride would only come after public confirmation of my worth. It'll be a performance, I said. Probably. But that doesn't mean you can't set boundaries. You can accept their apology if they offer a real one. You can allow them back into your life if they earn it, but you don't have to pretend the past 10 years didn't happen just to make them feel better. My phone buzzed. A text from Mom. Sarah, please call us. We need to talk about the party. We've already booked the venue and sent invitations. Everyone is so excited to celebrate you. I showed the message to Grandma Rose. She raised an eyebrow. They sent invitations before asking if you'd come, apparently. Well then, I guess you have a decision to make, don't you? I looked at the message again, at the casual assumption that I'd show up, that I'd play along with their narrative. The old Sarah, the one who'd spent 10 years being invisible and accepting it, would have agreed, would have smiled and thanked them and pretended everything was fine. But I wasn't that Sarah anymore. The ceremony had changed something, had brought to the surface truths I'd been avoiding. My family had failed me, fundamentally and repeatedly, and before I could even consider forgiving them, they needed to acknowledge that failure. Really acknowledge it, not with excuses or justifications, but with genuine understanding of the harm they'd caused. I typed out a response. Cancel the party. I'm not interested in being your show pony. If you want to talk, really talk. I'll be at Grandma Rose's tomorrow at 2 p.m. Just the four of us. No performance, no audience, no cameras, just honesty. I showed the message to Grandma Rose before sending it. She nodded approvingly. Good girl. Make them come to you. Make them do the work. I hit send, then turned off my phone. Whatever response came, I wasn't ready to see it yet. Stay for dinner, Grandma Rose said. I made pot roast, and you look like you haven't eaten a real meal in days. She wasn't wrong. I followed her back to her small apartment, grateful for the one person in my family who'd always seen me clearly, who'd trusted me even without proof, who'd loved me without conditions. Tomorrow, I'd face my family and demand the reckoning they owed me. Tonight, I'd eat pot roast with the one person who'd never doubted me, and I'd remember that I deserved better than the scraps of recognition my parents were finally offering. The question was whether they were capable of giving me what I actually needed, and I was about to find out. The next afternoon, I arrived at Grandma Rose's apartment at exactly 1:45 p.m. She'd set out coffee and cookies on her small dining table, creating a neutral space for what I knew would be a difficult conversation. Through the window, I could see my parents' car pulling into the visitor parking lot. Derek's truck arrived moments later. You ready for this? Grandma Rose asked, squeezing my shoulder. As ready as I'll ever be. The knock came at precisely 2 p.m. My father's punctuality, at least, was consistent. Grandma Rose opened the door, and they filed in, one by one. Mom's eyes were red and swollen. Dad looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot. Derek met my gaze briefly, then looked away. Sit, Grandma Rose instructed, gesturing to the living room. She'd arranged the furniture deliberately, me in the armchair, them on the couch facing me, a subtle power dynamic that I appreciated. Sarah, Mom began immediately, about the party, we can reschedule if you want, but we've already put down deposits. There's not going to be a party, I interrupted. That's not why we're here. Dad leaned forward. Then why are we here? You said you wanted to talk. I said I wanted honesty. That's different. I took a breath, centering myself. For 10 years, you believed I was a failure, a washout, someone who couldn't hack military service. You told that story to everyone, relatives, neighbors, friends. You made it the accepted truth of who I was. We didn't know, Mom protested. You never told us the truth. I couldn't tell you the specifics, but I told you repeatedly that I was still serving, that my work was classified, that I couldn't discuss it. You chose not to believe me. That's not fair, Dad said. You weren't wearing a uniform. You worked in a bookstore. What were we supposed to think? You were supposed to trust me, I said quietly. You were supposed to know me well enough to understand that I don't quit, that I don't fail, that when I commit to something, I see it through. But you didn't know me, did you? Not really. The silence that followed was thick. Derek shifted uncomfortably on the couch. Mom twisted her hands in her lap. Dad's jaw worked, but no words came out. I want to understand something, I continued. Admiral Hendricks announced my rank at Derek's ceremony. Within hours, you'd verified it with multiple sources, confirmed my service record, my medals, my commendations. You learned more about my career in one day than you'd bothered to learn in 10 years. Why? Because we didn't know it existed, Mom said, tears spilling down her cheeks. You thought I'd failed, so you didn't look deeper. You didn't ask harder questions. You accepted the narrative that fit your expectations. I leaned forward. Now I need to know. Was it easier to believe I'd failed? Did it make Derek's success shine brighter? Did it give you a reason to focus all your attention attention and resources on him? No, Dad said sharply. That's not what happened, isn't it? I pulled out my phone, opened my photos. I made a comparison. Last 5 years of Christmas gifts. Derek received a TAG Heuer watch, $1,500. I got a $50 gift card. Derek got a new laptop, $2,200. I got books. Derek got help with his condo down payment, $20,000. I got nothing because you assumed I couldn't manage money responsibly. I showed them the screen. The numbers were stark, undeniable. We helped Derek because he asked, Dad said defensively. You never asked for anything. I shouldn't have to ask for equal treatment. I shouldn't have to beg to be valued as much as my brother. Derek finally spoke. She's right. I got everything and Sarah got scraps. I didn't see it at the time, but looking back, it's obvious. Mom turned to him, shocked. Derek, we love you both equally. No, you don't, he interrupted. You love me more, or at least you show it more. Sarah's been invisible in this family for a decade, and I benefited from it. I got all the attention, all the support, all the pride, and I never questioned it because it felt good to be the golden child. I was surprised by his honesty, by the crack in his usual confident demeanor. I didn't realize, Mom whispered. I swear, Sarah, I didn't realize we were treating you differently. How could you not realize? I asked. Every family dinner, every holiday, every gathering, it was always about Derek, his training, his achievements, his future. When did you last ask me about my day? When did you last show interest in my life? She couldn't answer. None of them could. Here's what I need you to understand, I said. I don't want a party. I don't want you to perform pride you didn't feel when you thought I was a failure. I don't want you to rewrite history for your social media feeds or your friends. What I want is for you to acknowledge what actually happened, to sit with the discomfort of knowing you failed me as parents, to understand that your love was conditional and those conditions were destroying me. That's not true, Dad said. We always loved you. Did you? Because love means trust. Love means support. Love means showing up. Even when the achievements aren't visible or quantifiable, you didn't do any of that. Grandma Rose, who'd been quiet until now, spoke up. Robert, Margaret, I love you both, but Sarah's right. I've watched you sideline her for years. I've watched you pour everything into Derek while giving Sarah scraps. And when I tried to talk to you about it, you made excuses. You said Derek needed more support because his career was more demanding. You said Sarah was fine on her own. You said she understood. Mom, stay out of this, Dad said sharply. No, Grandma Rose replied firmly. I stayed out of it for too long. I should have pushed harder, insisted you see what you were doing, but I didn't. And that's on me. But I'm not staying silent anymore. Mom was fully crying now, her whole body shaking with sobs. What do you want from us, Sarah? Tell us how to fix this. I want you to actually see me, I said. Not Colonel Thompson, decorated intelligence officer, not the daughter you can finally brag about. Me, Sarah, the person who's been here all along, doing important work, living a meaningful life, even when you couldn't see it or value it. We do see you, Dad insisted. Do you? Then tell me something about my life. Anything. What's my favorite book? What do I do on weekends? Who are my friends? What matters to me? The silence stretched. They looked at each other, searching for answers that didn't come. You can't, I said, because you never asked. You never cared enough to learn. Derek cleared his throat. You like historical fiction. Your favorite author is Hilary Mantel. You volunteer at the Veterans Center on Saturday mornings. Your best friend is Rodriguez from your unit, and you call him family more than you call us family. You care about intelligence work because you believe information saves lives. You run 5 miles every morning at 0500. You hate coffee but drink it anyway. And you've been lonely for 10 years, invisible in your own family, while we all celebrated me. Everyone turned to stare at him. I felt tears prick my eyes. How do you know all that? Mom asked. Because I paid attention after the ceremony. I read every article I could find about her career. I talked to people who know her. I actually tried to learn who my sister is instead of assuming I already knew. He looked at me. I'm sorry it took me 30 years to do it. The room fell silent again. Mom was crying harder now. Dad had his head in his hands. Grandma Rose was nodding approvingly. This is what I need from you, I said, my voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm me. I need you to do the work Derek just did. Learn who I actually am. Acknowledge how you treated me. And then, maybe, we can start rebuilding something. But it has to be real. No performances, no social media posts about your amazing daughter. Just genuine effort to know me and value me regardless of my rank or accomplishments. And if we do that, Dad asked, looking up, if we put in the work, will you forgive us? I don't know, I answered honestly. Forgiveness isn't something you can demand or earn in a day. It's something that might come with time and changed behavior. But I'm willing to try if you are. Mom stood up suddenly, crossing the small space between us. She knelt in front of my chair, taking my hands in hers. I'm so sorry, baby. I'm so sorry. You're right about everything. We failed you. I failed you. And I want to do better. Please let me try. I looked down at her tear-stained face, saw genuine remorse there for the first time. It wasn't enough to erase 10 years of hurt, but it was a start. Okay, I said. But Mom, this isn't going to be easy. You're going to have to sit with uncomfortable truths. You're going to have to change behaviors that have been ingrained for a decade. Are you really ready for that? Yes, she said firmly. Whatever it takes. Dad stood up, came over, and did something he hadn't done since I was a little girl. He knelt down next to Mom, both of them looking up at me. I'm sorry too, Sarah. I'm sorry I didn't trust you. I'm sorry I let my own limitations blind me to your potential. I'm sorry I made you invisible in your own family. The apology was awkward, stiff, but it was genuine. I could see the effort it took for him to admit failure, to kneel before his daughter and acknowledge his mistakes. There's something else, Derek said. He pulled out his phone, tapped a few times, then showed me the screen. It was a social media post he'd drafted but not published. 10 years ago, my sister entered military service. I spent those 10 years thinking I was better than her, more accomplished, more valuable to our family and our country. Yesterday, I learned the truth. She's a colonel in naval intelligence. She's saved American lives. She's prevented terrorist attacks. She's done more for this country than I've even begun to do. And I spent 10 years treating her like she was less than me. I was wrong. She's my hero. Not because of her rank, but because she served with honor, even when no one in her family recognized it. I'm sorry, Sarah. I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of being called your brother. I read it twice, feeling something crack open in my chest. You don't have to post that. I want to, he said. People need to know the truth. I need to publicly acknowledge what I did wrong. Otherwise, it's just words between us. Derek, that's going to affect your career. People will judge you. Let them. You endured judgment for 10 years. I can handle a little accountability. I looked around the room at my family, all of them looking back at me with a mix of hope and fear and genuine remorse. It wasn't everything I'd wanted. It didn't erase the past or guarantee the future, but it was real, and that was more than I'd had before. Okay, I said. Here's what happens next. No party, no public celebration. Instead, we start over. Weekly family dinners where we actually talk to each other, where you ask me questions and I answer what I can, where Derek talks about his work and I talk about mine, within classification limits, where we build actual relationships instead of performances. Yes, Mom said immediately. Whatever you want. And therapy, I added. Family therapy, all of us. Because we have a decade of dysfunction to unpack. Dad looked uncomfortable but nodded. If that's what it takes, it is. And one more thing. Grandma Rose is right. She shouldn't have had to stay silent while you pushed me aside. From now on, when someone in this family sees something wrong, they speak up. No more pretending everything's fine when it isn't. Agreed, Derek said. The others nodded. I stood up, and Mom and Dad rose with me. For the first time in 10 years, my father hugged me like he meant it. Not a stiff pat on the back, but an actual embrace. Mom held on so tightly I could barely breathe. Thank you for giving us another chance, she whispered. I promise we'll do better. You have to do more than promise, I reminded her. You have to actually do it. We will, Dad said. I swear to you, Sarah, we will. Derek was the last to hug me. I meant everything I said in that post. You're my hero, Sarah, and I'm sorry it took me so long to see it. We both had to grow up, I said. I'm glad you're starting to. As they prepared to leave, making plans for the first family dinner the following week, Grandma Rose pulled me aside. You did good, sweetheart. You stood your ground. You demanded what you deserved. Do you think they'll follow through? I asked. I think they'll try. Whether they succeed depends on them, but you've given them a roadmap. Now it's their choice whether to follow it. After they left, I sat in Grandma Rose's living room, feeling emotionally drained, but oddly hopeful. The conversation had been brutal, but necessary. The truth had been painful, but freeing. My phone buzzed. A text from my handler. New assignment. Briefing Monday 0800. High priority. Back to work. Back to the world where I knew exactly who I was and what I was worth. But this time, maybe, just maybe, I'd have a family that actually saw me too. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. Rebuilding trust, establishing new patterns, learning to be vulnerable with people who'd hurt me deeply, all of it would require work and patience and faith that change was possible. But for the first time in 10 years, I felt like I wasn't invisible anymore, and that was worth fighting for. The briefing Monday morning at Naval Intelligence Headquarters was about what I expected. Another high-stakes operation. Another deployment to a region most Americans couldn't find on a map. Another classified mission where my success would remain invisible to everyone except the people whose lives I saved. Commander Patricia Hayes, my direct superior, laid out the parameters. We've got credible intelligence about a planned attack on coalition forces in the Horn of Africa. You'll be embedded with a joint task force, coordinating with CIA and special operations. Timeline is aggressive. Wheels up Wednesday at 0600. Understood, ma'am. How are you holding up, Thompson? She asked after dismissing the others. I heard about the situation with your family. Word travels fast. Admiral Hendricks mentioned it. Said he outed you at your brother's ceremony. She studied my face. That couldn't have been easy. It was time, I said. The cover story was starting to eat at me anyway. And how did they take it? I thought about the confrontation at Grandma Rose's apartment, the tears and apologies and promises. They're trying. We'll see if it sticks. Good. Because this next mission is going to be intense. I need you focused. Always am, ma'am. But as I left the briefing and headed back to the bookstore to maintain my cover for the next 48 hours, I couldn't stop thinking about the upcoming family dinner. The first real conversation with my parents in a decade. The first time they'd see me as a person rather than a disappointment or a trophy. Tuesday evening came faster than I expected. I'd spent the day at the bookstore, briefing my team on operational security while I was deployed, ensuring the safe house would remain functional in my absence. Rodriguez had offered to handle things personally, understanding the importance of maintaining the cover, even though my family now knew the truth. I pulled up to my parents' house at exactly 6 p.m., noting Derek's truck already in the driveway. The front door opened before I could knock, my mother appearing with an anxious smile. Sarah, come in, come in. I made your favorite pot roast with those little potatoes you like. I stepped inside, taking in the familiar space with new eyes. The walls were covered with family photos, and now I could see clearly what I'd always known but never fully acknowledged. Derek dominated every frame. His graduation photos, his commissioning ceremony, his SEAL training milestones. I appeared in maybe 3 pictures, always at the edge, always an afterthought. Mom followed my gaze. I'm taking those down, she said quietly. I'm going to create a new wall, one that includes you properly. You don't have to do that. Yes, I do. You deserve to be seen in your own home. Dad emerged from the kitchen wearing an apron, something I'd never seen before. Sarah, glad you made it. I'm trying to help with dinner. Your mother's teaching me. It was such a small thing, but somehow significant. Dad had never cooked a meal in his life, always claiming his work was too important, his time too valuable. The fact fact that he was in the kitchen at all represented a shift. Derek came down the stairs, and I noticed he was wearing civilian clothes rather than his usual tendency to wear Navy gear whenever possible. Another small change, but deliberate. "Hey," he said. "Thanks for coming." We gathered around the dining table, the same table where I'd endured countless dinners feeling invisible. But tonight felt different. The energy was awkward, uncertain, but genuine. "Before we eat," Mom said, "I want to say something." She took a deep breath. "Sarah, I've been thinking about what you said at Grandma Rose's, about how we never asked about your life. So I want to start now. Tell us about your work, what you can share, I mean." I looked at her, seeing real interest in her eyes rather than polite obligation. "It's mostly coordination and analysis. I work with intelligence from multiple sources, signals, human assets, surveillance, and put together operational pictures for decision makers. Sometimes I'm in the field, sometimes I'm at a desk. It varies based on the mission." "Is it dangerous?" Dad asked, and there was genuine concern in his voice. "Sometimes, but I'm well trained and I work with good people who have my back." "Like Rodriguez?" Derek asked. "You mentioned him the other day." I smiled. "Yeah, like Rodriguez. He's been on my team for 3 years. Best tactical analyst I've ever worked with, and he's saved my life twice." "Saved your life," Mom repeated faintly. "I never thought about you being in that kind of danger. Most people don't think about intelligence work that way. They think it's all computers and safe offices, but someone has to be on the ground, collecting information, coordinating operations. That's often me." "Tell us about one," Dad said. "A mission you can talk about." I considered what I could share without violating classification. 6 months ago, we got intelligence about a kidnapping. American aid workers taken by a militant group in sub-Saharan Africa. I coordinated with special operations to locate them. We tracked communications, analyzed movement patterns, identified the holding location. The rescue operation went down 48 hours after the kidnapping. All 3 hostages came home alive. "You saved 3 lives," Mom said softly. "My team did. I was part of it, but it takes dozens of people to make an operation like that work." "But you coordinated it," Derek said. "You were the one putting the pieces together." "That's my job." We ate dinner, and for the first time in memory, the conversation included me. They asked questions, real questions about my training, my career progression, the challenges of intelligence work. Dad wanted to know about the command structure. Mom asked about the people I worked with. Derek inquired about the relationship between intelligence and special operations. It wasn't perfect. There were awkward silences, moments when old patterns tried to reassert themselves, but each time someone would notice and deliberately redirect. When Dad started telling a long story about Derek's buds training, Mom gently interrupted and asked me about my own military training. After dinner, Derek pulled out his laptop. "I want to show you something." He opened a folder containing dozens of articles he'd collected about military intelligence, about women in special operations, about the invisible work that protected American lives. "I've been reading, trying to understand what you do. I found this article about a female intelligence officer who prevented an attack on a military base in Afghanistan. They didn't name her, but the timeline matches when you were deployed there in 2021. Was that you?" I looked at the article, recognizing the operation. "I can neither confirm nor deny." He smiled. "That's a yes." "Sarah, this is incredible. Why didn't we know about this?" "Because it was classified. Because the work I do doesn't come with press releases or ceremonies, and because you never asked." The last part came out sharper than I intended, but Derek nodded, accepting it. "You're right. We never asked. We assumed we knew your story, and we stopped looking deeper." Dad cleared his throat. "I want to apologize for something specific. After your ceremony, after Admiral Hendricks announced your rank, I called everyone I know in the Navy. I was verifying your service, making sure it was real." "I know," Derek told me. "What he didn't tell you is why I was so desperate to verify it." Dad looked uncomfortable. "I'd spent 10 years telling people you'd washed out. I'd used you as an example of someone who couldn't handle military life. When I found out the truth, I realized I'd been slandering you to everyone we know. I was trying to figure out how to walk it back." "And did you walk it back?" "I called everyone I'd talked to about you. I told them the truth, that you're a colonel, that you've been serving with distinction, that I was wrong about everything. Some of them were angry with me. My brother Tom hasn't spoken to me since. He said I failed you as a father, and he's right." The admission hung in the air. Mom reached over and squeezed Dad's hand, tears in her eyes. "I also talked to my CO," Dad continued. "I retired as a second-class petty officer. I never advanced higher because I didn't put in the work, but I was always bitter about it. Always felt like the Navy didn't appreciate me. When you joined, part of me wanted you to fail because it would validate my own failure. If you couldn't succeed, then it wasn't my fault I didn't succeed." "That's ugly, Sarah. That's a terrible thing for a father to feel, but it's the truth." I sat back, processing this. "Thank you for being honest. I'm trying to do better. We all are." He looked at Derek, then back at me. "Your brother posted that statement on social media, the one about you being his hero. Do you know what happened?" "I haven't looked." Derek turned his laptop around. The post had over 15,000 shares, hundreds of comments. Most were supportive, praising Derek's honesty and my service. But there were also harsh comments criticizing him for taking so long to recognize me, questioning his judgment, suggesting he'd benefited from family favoritism. "Some of my teammates saw this," Derek said. "I got called into my commander's office. He asked if it was true, if I'd really spent 10 years dismissing my sister's service. What did you say?" I said yes, that I'd been blind and arrogant, and I was working to do better. He told me that humility is part of being a good operator, that recognizing my mistakes makes me stronger, not weaker. Smart commander. He also said he'd served with you, that you briefed his team before a mission in Syria, and your intelligence saved 4 of his men. He told me I was an idiot for not seeing what I had right in front of me. I remembered that mission. Remembered the young SEAL team that had been so grateful for the detailed intelligence package we provided. Small world. He wants to meet you, actually. He said if you're ever on Coronado, stop by. He owes you a beer. I'll keep that in mind. Mom stood up and started clearing dishes. I automatically rose to help, falling into old patterns. But this time, Dad and Derek also stood up, all of us working together to clean up. It was domestic and ordinary, but somehow significant. As we washed dishes, Mom spoke quietly. I made an appointment with a family therapist for all of us. Next Thursday at 4 p.m. Is that okay? I'll be deployed, I said. I leave Wednesday morning. Her face fell. Oh, of course. How long? Unknown. Could be weeks, could be months. That must be hard, never knowing when you'll be home, always being ready to leave. It's the job. Do you love it? She asked. The work, the missions, all of it? I thought about it. Really thought about it. Yes, I love serving. I love knowing that what I do matters, that I'm protecting people, that I'm making a difference even if no one knows it. I'm glad, she said. I'm glad you found something that fulfills you, even if we were too blind to see it. We finished the dishes in comfortable silence. When everything was cleaned up, we returned to the living room. Derek had photos pulled up on his laptop. I went through our family albums, he said, looking at how few pictures we have of you, so I want to change that. Sarah, tell me about your favorite mission, the one that meant the most to you. I settled into the couch, and for the first time in 10 years, I told my family a story about my real life, about a mission in Eastern Europe where we'd uncovered a human trafficking network, how we'd coordinated with local law enforcement and international agencies, how we'd rescued 23 women and children. I couldn't share names or specific locations, but I shared the emotions, the challenges, the satisfaction of seeing those survivors freed. They listened, really listened. Dad asked questions about the logistics. Mom wanted to know about the victims, what happened to them after. Derek inquired about the tactical elements of the raid. When I finished, Mom was crying again. You saved 23 people, 23 lives that would have been destroyed. My team saved them. I was part of it. Stop diminishing what you do, Dad said firmly. You're part of a team, but you're also a leader. You coordinate, you make decisions, you take responsibility. That's what officers do. I know because I never made it that far, but I saw good officers in action. You're one of them. The acknowledgement settled over me like a warm blanket. Not extravagant praise, not performance for an audience, just simple recognition from someone who understood military service. We talked for another hour, and slowly, carefully, we began building something new. Not erasing the past, but creating a foundation for a different future. They asked about my apartment, my routines, my friends outside of work. I learned that Mom had started volunteering at a veterans center, trying to understand military culture better. Dad had been reading about naval intelligence, studying organizational structures and operational security. When it was time to leave, Mom hugged me tightly. Come back safe, baby, please. I always do. And when you get back, we'll reschedule that therapy appointment. All of us. I'd like that. Dad walked me to my car. Sarah, I know I can't undo 10 years of failure, but I want you to know I see you now, the real you, and I'm proud of you. Not because of your rank, but because of who you are. You're brave, dedicated, principled. You're everything I should have been. Dad, you don't have to. Yes, I do. I need to say this before you leave. You're a better person than I am. You always have been. And I'm sorry it took me this long to recognize it. I hugged him, feeling decades of tension begin to dissolve. Thank you. Derek was waiting by his truck. As I approached, he handed me something, a small leather notebook. What's this? Write in it. When you're deployed, when you can't call or text, write about what you're doing, what you're feeling. Then when you get back, share what you can with us. Help us understand your world. I opened the notebook. On the first page, he'd written, for my hero, my sister, Sarah, come home safe. I will, I promised. As I drove away, I looked in the rearview mirror. All three of them stood in the driveway, waving. A family that had finally learned to see me, that was finally putting in the work to know me. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. Patterns built over 10 years wouldn't change overnight. There would be setbacks, moments when old dynamics tried to reassert themselves, times when I'd question whether this new relationship was sustainable. But for the first time in a decade, I had hope. Hope that my family could become what I'd always wanted them to be. People who saw me, valued me, loved me for who I actually was, rather than who they wanted me to be. I had a mission to prepare for, a deployment that would take me to dangerous places, work that would remain classified and invisible to most of the world. But now, when I came home, there would be people who understood, who recognized the significance of what I did, even if they couldn't know the details. My phone buzzed. A text from Rodriguez. Ready for tomorrow, boss? I smiled and replied, always ready. Tomorrow, I'd return to the world where I was Colonel Sarah Thompson, intelligence officer, coordinator of critical operations, protector of American lives. But tonight, I was just Sarah, daughter, sister, granddaughter, finally seen by the people who should have been seeing me all along. And that made all the difference. 6 months later, I stood in Grandma Rose's garden again, but this time I wasn't alone. Mom knelt beside me, helping plant new roses while Grandma Rose supervised from her bench, offering instructions and commentary in equal measure. A little more to the left, Margaret. These bushes need room to spread. The deployment to the Horn of Africa had lasted 3 months, longer than expected, but ultimately successful. We disrupted the planned attack, neutralized the threat network, and returned home without casualties. I'd written in Derek's notebook almost every night, documenting what I could, processing emotions I'd suppressed for years. When I'd returned to San Diego in late December, my family had been waiting at the bookstore, not making a scene, not drawing attention, just quietly present when I walked through the door after 48 hours of travel. Mom had brought food, Dad had offered to help with anything I needed. Derek had simply hugged me and said, welcome home. We'd started family therapy 2 weeks later. The sessions were brutal at times, forcing all of us to confront uncomfortable truths in-depths about our family dynamics. Dr. Chen, our therapist, didn't let anyone hide behind excuses or deflections. She made Dad acknowledge how his own insecurity had poisoned his relationship with me. She pushed Mom to recognize how she'd enabled the favoritism. She challenged Derek to understand the privilege he'd enjoyed and the harm it had caused. But slowly, through tears and difficult conversations and homework assignments that made us all uncomfortable, we'd begun to change. Not perfectly, not without setbacks, but genuinely. There, Mom said, patting down the soil around the new rose bush. That should do it. Good work, Grandma Rose approved. Now it just needs time and care. Like everything worth growing. Mom smiled at me, understanding the metaphor. Our relationship was like that rose bush, newly planted, requiring consistent attention, but with the potential to bloom if we tended it properly. My phone buzzed. A text from Derek. Still on for dinner tonight? Stephanie wants to meet you properly. I typed back, absolutely. Looking forward to it. Derek's fiancée Stephanie had reached out a month ago, apologizing for the pool party that had coincided with an event I couldn't attend. She hadn't known the context at the time, but looking back, she felt terrible about it. We'd met for coffee, and I'd liked her immediately. She was smart, direct, and unafraid to call Derek out when he slipped into old patterns of self-centeredness. Derek texted, I told Mom as we washed our hands. Dinner tonight at their place. That'll be nice. Stephanie seems lovely. She is. She's good for him. We said goodbye to Grandma Rose and drove back to my parents' house. The walls had changed, just as Mom had promised. The shrine to Derek had been replaced with a more balanced representation of our family. There were new photos of me, some recent, some digitally restored from my childhood. My Defense Distinguished Service Medal hung in a shadow box next to Derek's trident. Not competing, just coexisting. Dad was in his workshop when we arrived, building something from wood. He'd taken up woodworking after retirement, finding therapy and creating tangible things with his hands. Sarah, come look at this. I followed him into the garage. On his workbench sat a nearly completed shadow box, larger and more elaborate than the one hanging in the living room. It's for your other medals and commendations, he explained, the ones that aren't classified. I called Admiral Hendrix's office and got a list. I hope that's okay. I looked at the carefully crafted box, at the care evident in every joint and corner. It's more than okay, Dad. It's beautiful. I want you to feel seen here, in this house, in this family. He set down his tools. I know we're still learning, still making mistakes, but I want you to know we're trying. I know you are, and it means everything. That evening, Derek and Stephanie's condo was warm with cooking smells and laughter when I arrived. Derek had learned to cook over the past few months. Another small change that represented growth. He wasn't the same entitled golden child who'd taken family attention for granted. He'd done the work to understand his privilege and was actively trying to be different. Sarah! Stephanie greeted me with a hug. Come in. Derek's attempting coq au vin. We'll see how it goes. We gathered around their small dining table, the three of us, and it felt easy in a way family dinners never had before. Derek asked about my current assignment, which I'd briefed as desk work for the moment. Stephanie shared stories about her pharmaceutical sales job. We talked about their wedding plans, their hopes for the future, the life they were building together. I have something to ask you, Derek said as we finished dessert. Stephanie and I have been talking about the wedding party. I want you to be my best man, or best woman, whatever the terminology is. I stared at him. What about your SEAL buddies, your friends from the academy? They're important to me, but you're my sister, and I want you standing next to me when I get married, if you're willing. Of course I'm willing. There's one condition, Stephanie added with a smile. You have to wear your dress uniform, the full colonel's uniform with all the medals you can legally display. I want everyone at that wedding to see exactly who Derek's sister is. I laughed. That's quite a statement. It's the truth, Derek said. For too long, we hid you away, made you invisible. At my wedding, I want everyone to see you clearly. The wedding took place 3 months later, a beautiful ceremony at a botanical garden in San Diego. I stood next to Derek in my navy dress whites, eagles gleaming on my collar, rows of ribbons on my chest. Every military member in attendance, which was most of the guests, knew exactly what those ribbons represented. During the reception, Admiral Hendrix approached me, a glass of champagne in hand. Colonel Thompson, good to see you in your proper uniform for once. Admiral, thank you for coming, sir. Wouldn't miss it. Your brother speaks very highly of you these days. Quite a change from the ceremony last year. People can grow, sir. Indeed they can. He gestured around the reception. You know, half the officers here have worked with you at some point. They're all thrilled to finally meet you out of cover. It was true. Throughout the evening, naval officers and intelligence personnel approached me. Some I'd worked with directly, others who knew of my operations. The work I'd done in the shadows was being acknowledged in the light, not in any official capacity, but through quiet recognition from people who understood. Dad found me during a quiet moment, his eyes damp. I keep thinking about all the ceremonies I missed, all the achievements I didn't celebrate, all the times I should have been proud and wasn't. Dad, we've talked about this in therapy. You can't change the past. I know, but I can honor the present. He pulled an envelope from his jacket. This is for you. Don't open it now. Wait until you're alone. Later that night, back in my apartment, I opened the envelope. Inside was a letter in my father's handwriting. Sarah, today, I watched you stand next to your brother at his wedding, proud and strong in your uniform, and I realized something. I've spent my entire life chasing recognition I didn't earn, bitter about promotions I didn't deserve, jealous of people who outworked me. I projected that failure onto you, convincing myself that if you failed too, it would justify my own shortcomings. But you didn't fail. You soared. You became everything I could have been if I'd put in the work, shown the discipline, made the sacrifices. You're the naval officer I pretended to be. You're the person I wish I'd been. I can't give you back the 10 years I stole from you. I can't undo the hurt or erase the dismissal, but I can promise you this. this. For whatever time I have left, I will see you. I will value you. I will be the father you deserved all along. I'm proud of you, Sarah. Not because of your rank or your medals, but because you remained true to yourself even when everyone around you tried to diminish you. That takes a strength I never had. Thank you for giving me another chance. I won't waste it. Love, Dad. I read it 3 times, tears streaming down my face. It wasn't enough to erase the past, but it was enough to build a future on. The following months fell into a new rhythm. Weekly family dinners where everyone contributed, not just in cooking, but in conversation. Monthly therapy sessions where we continued unpacking decades of dysfunction. Random texts from Derek asking about intelligence work or sharing articles he'd read. Mom calling just to check in, not because she needed something, but because she wanted to hear my voice. They still made mistakes. Old patterns still tried to reassert themselves. But now, when someone slipped, someone else noticed and spoke up. When Dad started telling a long story about himself at dinner, Mom would gently redirect. When Derek's accomplishments started dominating conversation, I would speak up and he would listen. 9 months after the ceremony that changed everything, I received orders for a new assignment. Deputy Director of Naval Intelligence Operations for the Pacific Fleet. It was a promotion, a significant one, that would keep me stationed in San Diego for at least 3 years. Real office hours, predictable schedule, less time in combat zones. When I told my family, Mom cried happy tears. Dad shook my hand with genuine pride. Derek raised his glass in a toast. To my sister, he said at that week's family dinner, who's saving the world one classified operation at a time, and who finally has a family that sees her doing it. To Sarah, Mom and Dad echoed. I looked around the table at these people who had hurt me so deeply and were now working so hard to do better. They weren't perfect. Our relationship wasn't healed completely. Some wounds run too deep to fully close, but they were trying, genuinely, consistently trying, and that was enough. A year after Admiral Hendricks announced my rank at Derek's SEAL ceremony, we gathered again at Grandma Rose's apartment, all of us together, to celebrate her 85th birthday. The photos from that day tell a different story than the family pictures of years past. In these photos, I'm not on the edge of the frame. I'm not invisible or diminished. I'm standing in the center, surrounded by people who finally see me, value me, love me for exactly who I am. Derek stands beside me, not in front of me. His trident pin and my eagles catch the light equally. Mom and Dad flank us, their pride evident but balanced. And Grandma Rose sits in front of us all, the matriarch who never doubted me, whose faith sustained me through the years of invisibility. That photo hangs in my office now, next to my shadow box of medals and commendations. Visitors see the military decorations first, the evidence of classified operations and dangerous missions. But I see the photo, the visual reminder of a different kind of victory. I won back my family, not by changing who I was or diminishing my achievements, but by demanding they see me clearly and refusing to accept less than I deserved. They had to earn their way back into my life, and they did it through consistent effort and genuine change. Some people might say I should have cut them off completely, that their decade of dismissal was unforgivable. Others might think I should have forgiven them immediately, that family always deserves second chances. But I chose a third path, conditional reconnection. I gave them the opportunity to do better, but only after they acknowledged exactly how they'd failed. I let them back into my life, but only as much as they earned through changed behavior. A year and a half after the ceremony, I can say it was the right choice. Not because everything is perfect, it's not, but because we're all growing. My family is learning to value invisible work, to trust without needing proof, to love without conditions. And I'm learning that vulnerability doesn't equal weakness, that letting people in can coexist with strong boundaries. I still serve in naval intelligence, still run operations that will never be publicly acknowledged, still protect American lives in ways most people will never know about. But now, when I come home from classified briefings or long deployments, I have a family that understands the significance of my work, even if they can't know the details. Derek texts me before every mission he can tell me about, asking for my expertise, treating me as the experienced officer I am. Mom calls weekly, asking real questions and listening to real answers. Dad attends every ceremony he's allowed to attend, standing in the back with tears in his eyes, finally understanding what he missed for so long. And Grandma Rose, she just smiles knowingly, the woman who saw me clearly when no one else did, validated in her faith. Did my family's betrayal hurt? Absolutely. Did their decade of dismissal leave scars? Without question. Am I glad Admiral Hendricks announced my rank that day, forcing the truth into the open, every single day? Because sometimes being invisible in your own family is the loneliest feeling in the world. And sometimes the only way to become visible is to stop accepting the shadows and step into the light, regardless of who's ready to see you. I'm Colonel Sarah Thompson. I'm a naval intelligence officer. I've prevented terrorist attacks, coordinated hostage rescues, and saved American lives. And now, finally, I'm also a daughter, a sister, a granddaughter who's seen and valued by her family. It took 34 years and a very public revelation to get here. But standing in Grandma Rose's garden, surrounded by people who finally understand who I am and what I'm worth, I can honestly say the fight was worth it. Every single classified, invisible, underappreciated moment was worth it to reach this point, because I didn't compromise who I was to earn their love. I demanded they rise to meet me where I already stood, and eventually, beautifully, they did. What do you think about this story? Have you ever felt invisible in your own family, like your achievements went unrecognized while someone else got all the attention? Or maybe you've had to set firm boundaries with family members who took you for granted. Share your experience experience in the comments. I'd love to hear if you faced something similar. And if this story resonated with you, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for your support and for watching until the end.